Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Phoenix Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Christo Scriven, and today I'm joined by Trevor Brown, a Buddhist-informed clinician and therapist. Trevor, you say that our obsession with personal growth is just a distraction. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So I think our culture we put a lot of emphasis on personal growth, which is, in a nutshell, I mean, it is good. I come from that world myself. I'm also very interested in personal growth. However, I do think it can slide into territory of becoming an obsession that is never satisfied. And at that point, I think that it's serving a certain distracting function. I think that we continue to seek out the next personal growth project in order to escape something in ourselves in the immediacy of the moment that we happen to be in. And I think that we end up putting a full engagement with life somewhere off into the future, where consciously or unconsciously we tell ourselves something like, once I've achieved this, once I get that, once I've healed this, once I've achieved that, then I'll be ready to show up fully for my life. And
Mm.
so we end up avoiding life in the immediacy of the moment, and we use personal growth, which starts off as a very worthwhile undertaking some of the time. This isn't all the time, but some of the time, as actual a sort of glorified avoidance strategy.
Very similar to, you could say, an addiction, because I think a lot of people's addictions stems from them wanting to distract themselves from some sort of uncomfortability.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I was watching a video the other day from a guy called Jordan Thornton on YouTube. So his channel is all about inner work. Great channel. Check it out.
Okay.
But he was saying how when you're on a journey of healing, which is one aspect of personal growth, right? You can become obsessed with the journey of healing. And even though you've done so much, you still feel like, because it's the only thing you can control. So you feel like, I'm just going to keep pouring myself into this healing journey, and then you kind of start creating problems because you want something that you feel like you can focus on and control that doesn't have so many variables, I suppose, because it's inside yourself. Whereas things outside yourself, other people come into it, other situations, like lots of things come into it, right?
Yeah, I want to like do snaps to that. Like that really resonates with me. Although
Mm.
I would frame it a little bit differently. I think that ultimately what the final product of what we see is the same. This sort of compulsive, that's what I you went to addiction, and when I use the
Uh,
term obsession, that's what I'm getting at too. So there's a
sure.
quality of compulsion, impulsiveness, obsession, not real choicefulness. And so what you were
Mm.
talking about there is remaining needing to generate problems in order to be able to feel like we're exercising some control, and then
Mm.
stay on the path of healing. So I think that we do something similar. I would say something similar, that we're generating these problems, but my twist would be that we're doing it because those problems are serving the function, similar to what I was saying before, the function of distracting us from something in the immediacy of the moment that we're refusing to have a relationship with. So some degree of vulnerability in ourself, um, and this aspect of control, just that also resonates with me, because it's like
Mm.
things are so sort of chaotic. The world is so hard to just put into a neat little bundle. But yeah, if we can out of all of that generate something to put our focus on and then direct our efforts to, it like gives us something to hold on to, like a certain reference point. So we end up using problems as reference points, which is the other what he's speaking to, I think. Like that's the other appealing aspect.
What is an example of the things that we might try to distract ourselves from? So when we're going into that personal growth, instead of engaging with our lives and the challenges or the situations and circumstances around us, we just go, okay, I'm just going to focus on myself. If I put myself together, then that stuff will kind of go away. This kind of mental trick you're playing on yourself. What could be a typical
Mm.
example, do you think, where someone would go back into that pattern?
So So what you're speaking about there is like a means of distracting ourselves from external circumstances that are not to our liking, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think so. And then where I'm typically orienting from is we're distracting ourselves from something inside of us. So so even these external circumstances, people um they may not like them, and they may want some distraction from them, but they don't like them, in my opinion, just my view, because the external circumstances are triggering vulnerabilities inside themselves that they're refusing to have a relationship with. So what I'm interested in as a therapist is like, what are the sets of vulnerabilities in our own lived experience, that we're trying to keep at a distance? And
Mm,
so those vulnerabilities, just to name one or two, I mean, they're pretty core, they're pretty fundamental to the human experience. I think that when most people peel back the layers, they're going to find them, and they're like experiences of powerlessness, helplessness, grief, rage, panic, raw sort of fear, just things that are kind of often at the root of our psychological emotional experiencing, but for very good reason we
mm,
would just kind of rather not look at. And so we stay focused on personal growth or certain problems. Um, so I might,
okay.
is that making sense? It's a little bit different maybe from
Yeah, no, yeah,
the
thanks for
question you
clarifying
asked.
that. That's
Yeah. Okay.
a really interesting way of looking at it. Those that internal uncomfortability, those distressing or
Yeah.
disturbing states and emotions that are arising.
Yeah.
And when you say escape from those in personal growth,
Hmm.
what do you mean by personal growth exactly? Like reading books, like in podcasts and things like that? Or what do you think the distraction is that people are using?
Yeah. I think that fundamentally it's just this idea that I could be better, that I could be yeah, that I could, let's just say, be better. I could be different somehow.
Mm,
Um, Underneath that is it's usually unconscious, but it's just the belief that once I'm better, I won't have these vulnerabilities here anymore. I won't have to feel these vulnerabilities anymore once I fully overcome myself and get somewhere else. And then
mm,
from that, like I could be better, any number of personal growth projects could appeal to somebody. Um, and I just, for the viewers, I feel like I need to reiterate that personal growth is not bad, and even if it is obsessive, it's a pretty damn good obsession. Like it's going to come with some pretty amazing payoffs, but there
mm,
just might be a certain function that's being served in terms of avoidance. But yeah, any sort of podcast or any sort of um, book or series of talks, or online courses. I mean, but I've been interested in all of that stuff immensely in my life. So
mm, mm.
yeah.
Yeah, now you're describing it in this way, I can definitely see the pattern in myself as well, uh, where I will look to, I guess I'm trying to make myself feel better. If I'm in a state that's not great, I'm
Yes.
just feeling like a bit low or whatever, I'll be like, right, I need to listen to something good. I need to change my state. I need to get a podcast on, read a book, and then afterwards I'm fine. Oh yeah, I'm feeling better now. But that is a pattern probably that emerges regularly. I don't know how often, but it definitely emerges regularly. So what you're saying is that um, without tackling that sense that you're trying to escape from, the thing that you're trying to distract yourself from, without tackling that head on, then anything is a distraction.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Then we quickly fall into the compulsion to escape, and so yes, then it becomes a distraction. And of course, like there's healthier distractions and less healthy ones. And so again,
Mm-hmm.
personal growth would be one of the top ones. But so this would just be like if this is resonating with people or something they'd like to explore, I wouldn't say stop the personal growth stuff. Like don't listen to the podcast or read a book when you're feeling down. I would just say, what would it be like if when you catch yourself moving to that familiar behavioral pattern, to just put a little gap in between where for 10 or 30 seconds, you just ask yourself, I wonder if something's arising in me, meaning a feeling, a vulnerability. It's usually at the sensation level that
Mm-hmm.
I wish I didn't have to feel right now. And so it's just inviting a dialogue in ourselves so that we balance out the impulse to get away from, move towards something else with the investigation of what's here right now. And do I have to get away from it? And in time, we may develop the confidence of choice. And what I mean by that is we may develop the confidence of like, you know, this is vulnerable. I feel a little bit exposed. I feel some panic inside of me, maybe some anxiety, not quite sure what, but just like not that great. And I can hang out with it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
actually, well, I don't need to get away from it. And then a few minutes go by and maybe you feel better, or a few minutes goes by and you're like, that was good. And now I'm ready to do the other thing that I really enjoy doing. Now I'd like to change my state because I know I can do something to feel better. Why wouldn't I? So it's just introducing this. Both of them can sort of exist together, I think. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's not one or the other.
Sure. And it's interesting because what you're talking about, feeling the emotion, really confronting
Uh-huh.
it and tackling it and observing it and being curious about it and
Yeah.
kind of creating a relationship with it and maybe even a dialogue. Because you can talk, like you can do kind of language exercises with these states,
Yeah.
and they do that in parts therapy, right?
Totally. Totally.
Uh, it's still personal growth.
Yes, it is. It's 100% personal growth. That's the whole trick that I play. It's like, yeah, that's why the video you were referencing a YouTube video in the beginning that picked up some
Yes.
steam, and
Hmm.
yes, fundamentally I still am personal growth oriented. I just think that it's sort of a sneaky way of getting there, and um in some sense maybe I'm not going to say a better one, but just another one. And it looks a little bit different on the surface, but 100% is about personal growth. You caught me.
Personal growth is a very broad term, though, and you
Right.
could say that it kind of ebbs and flows and it fluxes in different ways. And if
Hmm.
you're using self-improvement podcasts and books and things like that to then you're trying to develop your mind, your mindset, and change the way you see the world, become more confident, believe in yourself and believe in the good in other people and things like that, and motivate yourself, become more disciplined and things. Those are all positive. That's where growth is actually occurring. But then when it gets to a point where you're just using it because you have these uncomfortable states arising, and then you're distracting yourself from those states, it becomes a point where it's no longer growth. It's detrimental to your growth. So you think it's personal growth. You think that you're doing the right thing, but really it's something that's now holding you back.
Well said, man. Well said. I'm right there with you. So it's like the impulse to personal growth initially is so important, and it gets us out of thinking patterns, behavioral patterns, ways of being in the world, ways of seeing in the world that were holding
Mhm.
us back, that were generating hardship, so on and so forth. And it's like that first surge forward, and we were open to a vision of what's possible and what we're capable of and what the world could be for us and what we could be for the world. All of that's so good. And yes, then it's like, well, the things that got you there may not be what gets you to the next there.
Yeah,
The things that got you out of the first rut or something, they may be a little bit different. It might be another set of tools or practices that will take you to the next place.
absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think people come along this journey in different ways. Some people go into the inner work or therapy route first, and they're dealing with those
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable states and the trauma, the 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 memories that they don't want to dig up and things like that. Whereas others are on the other side of it, on the kind of self improvement, life coaching side of things, where they're setting goals and creating a vision for their life and visualizing it and
Mm-hmm.
doing things to raise or increase their energy. And I think there becomes a point where you have to pivot to the other side because it's all part of the project of you. You
Mm-hmm.
have to do all those things. And yeah, I think it's a really important distinction to make that even the positive distractions become hindrances. They are definitely improvements on the previous things, like the junk food, sex,
Mm-hmm.
porn,
Mm-hmm.
love,
Mm-hmm.
video games. And then you kind of
Mm.
move into, okay, well, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to listen to a podcast, I'm going to go for a run, and all these things. And then you become a compulsive runner because every time you feel an uncomfortable emotion, you're like, nope, I'm going for a run. Bye, I
Yep.
gotta go. You're out running
Yup.
for 5 miles. Um,
Totally. Totally.
and it's better, of course it is, because
Mm-hmm.
it is a healthy way to process those things. But if those things are coming up again and again and again, they're coming from somewhere, and you might need to look into that place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I would say it's probably not processing them, but it's managing them, like the
Sure.
compulsive running or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and anything can fall into it. Meditation. I come from that world, that background. So people can become compulsive meditators, and then it serves a similar type of function. Um, Even when they think it's doing the thing of bringing them deeper into themselves, they can use it. I've used it in a way to just kind of step out of the experience, the aspect of our experience we don't like. Therapy itself can be. People can use therapy in such a way that they think that they're doing something that's going towards personal growth, but it's just become another sort of safe, familiar way of not really processing in a deep, meaningful sense, but just kind of coping on a more surface level sense, which isn't
Mm-hmm.
pathological or anything, but it's good to be clear maybe about why we're using something and how we're using it.
You're not really getting to the bottom of it. What
Yeah.
what are some of the ways? I guess therapy would be one. Meditation can be one as well. But what are some of the ways that you can actually healthily process the emotions? You kind of touched on one when you said you're sitting with it and just kind of spending some time with it, which is kind of like a mindfulness exercise, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm sure there's all sorts of them. A few come to mind for me and a few that I use personally and that I might recommend to clients. So I'll speak about those. Um, I mean, I think that sort of the first step is to investigate what's happening in our bodies as opposed to in our minds, because the emotion is probably going to live on a sort of energetic level inside the somatic experiencing of our body. And so
Yeah.
I'll invite my clients to just become curious about what it is that they're experiencing on a sensation level, their immediate sensation level experience in a given moment. If they find that they're involved in another one of their avoidance behaviors, hey, next time that happens, what would it be like? Just ask yourself, I wonder what I'm feeling on a sensation level right now. For people who haven't done that, it might be like, oh, nothing. I can't feel a single thing, which is okay because it's still inviting a different practice into what had just been a sort of compulsive type of thing.
Mhm.
But I think in time, many people develop a subtlety. They're like, oh, my chest is a little tight, my stomach is in knots, my head is feeling buzzy and heavy, something like that. And then I might say, so what would it be like to hang out with that sensation? And yeah, I think you were saying something similar for 15 seconds, 10, 15 seconds, 30 seconds maximum, and just kind of burn up with it or be the place in which it occurs. Um, so that's
Mm.
just processing on a purely embodied way, not necessarily uncovering meanings or getting a deeper understanding for why it is that we're feeling something, but just being with what it is that we're feeling because it's what's there. And in being with it, it will probably move and change. But even if it doesn't, I mean, it's still it's still meaningful, I think. So that's one thing that comes to mind. Is that making sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a
Uh-huh.
really great practice. It can be very uncomfortable, though, for a
It
lot of
is very
people.
uncomfortable.
And if you're
100%.
distracting yourself enough for long enough from your emotions, particularly people that are in recovery or addicts and things like that. And I mean, we're probably, all classed as addicts these days.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that one of the most mainstream definitions of addiction is uh, you have a compulsive tendency towards something that is detrimental to your own well-being in some way. And we probably all use our phones to a point which is detrimental to our well-being,
Hand up.
for sure. Yeah, amongst other things, but that's everyone has a phone. It's
Mm-hmm.
glued to us, right? It's part of who we are, and
Mm-hmm.
it's probably
Mm-hmm.
detrimental to our well-being. And it's compulsive, it's impulsive, and uh, to some degree, obsessive for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you stop that pattern, when you go, okay, I'm sticking a kind of a stick in the wheel of the bike in the
Uh-huh.
spokes to stop it.
That's
You
right.
can be like, "Ur," and then
Totally.
everything comes up. It can be very hard to process those things. So if someone is finding it very difficult to do that
Mm-hmm.
on their own, what other things could they do?
Yeah, I think that the stick in the wheel is a good metaphor because it's like, yeah, then the bike comes to a screeching halt and we go flying off the handlebars, and that's terrifying, and we might get hurt a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think in the so I offered that one um example for processing the emotions. Um, but you're saying, and just to piggyback off of something else you were saying quickly, it will be disturbing. It will be. That's why we're avoiding it in the first place. Because we
Right. Yeah.
intuitively know that to go into it will be a disturbing experience. We fear unconsciously that it will be overwhelming. Because as children, it actually was. Like the intensity of these emotions was too much for us tiny little beings to process. As adults, I think we'll gradually find that we have much more capacity to be with the intensity than we think we do. But we have to challenge our historical conditioning that tells us that we don't by just turning to it again and again and again. Um, I hope this answers your question. I'm not sure if it does, but two things that I might recommend are like if you're gonna go into the somatic level experiencing, I would say just what would it be like to tell yourself, I'm going to experience, I give myself permission to experience 10% of this, 10% of whatever's there, 15%
Mhm.
of whatever's there for 15 seconds. And I think when we tell our self that, it kind of puts parameters on it. Like it kind of it makes us a little bit more confident that we won't be overwhelmed by it. And so we just do it in little snippets, bite-sized pieces. Not all or nothing, not everything at once. It doesn't need to be super big. It's just like throwing little pebbles maybe at the wheel, um, and I don't know. Eventually, the pebbles get bigger. Eventually, we can put in sticks and then a bigger stick or something. But yeah,
Sure.
just tiny
Or
little things.
like a gravel trap. Have those on the roads, on the hills,
Yes,
and if you land
yes,
in that and it slows you down,
yeah,
it saves
yeah.
you
That's it.
from crashing at the bottom. Because I think that's what, like
Yeah.
using the metaphor, that's what happens, right? If you don't
Uh,
stop the pattern, you're going to end up crashing at the bottom of the hill because
yes.
something it's going to. This is what the shadow is, right? In Jungian psychology, it's
Yeah.
these dark recesses of our minds that we don't want to look in. It's the shadowy
Hmm.
places that are fragmented
Hmm.
from our own psyches.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Jung said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said,
Uh-huh.
whatever you don't,
Yeah.
whatever you don't attend to, not only stays where it is, but it grows, expands, and so
Uh,
it will come up
uh,
and it will show up in ways in your life that could be cataclysmic for you. It could feel like that anyway.
definitely.
You wrote, we can, we can't not. Sorry, start again. We can't not be personally responsible. We already always are. We can't not accept ourselves just as we are. We already always do.
Yeah. So I also think it was Jung. I think he said something like self-acceptance is the most terrifying thing we can do. I'm totally paraphrasing that. If somebody searches that quote, it may not come up at all. But I know he says something about how scary it is to accept ourselves fully as we are.
Mm,
My view, and my view is more informed by Buddhism, my view is that we've already accepted ourselves. So what we're not accepting is that we haven't accepted ourselves. Wait, did I get that right? Yes,
you
we're
did.
pretending that we haven't accepted ourselves because
Hmm.
we're already here as we are. That's all the proof that I think we need to know that we've accepted ourselves. But then we put a trick on ourselves. We play a game with ourselves by pretending that we're unacceptable. But we've already fundamentally accepted who we are in a given moment. I'm not saying it doesn't mean we want to change ourselves, but
Mm,
any given moment, who we are is who we are. So it's I don't know, it's a little bit confusing maybe, but let me also talk about the personal responsibility. It might get to something similar. A lot
sure,
of
yeah.
people,
But
I think, very appropriately talk about the practice of personal responsibility. I talk a lot about it in my own psychotherapy practice because it's one of the fundamental means that we have to re-empower ourselves. If we've disempowered ourselves in certain ways, it allows us to return home to ourselves, come back to our own locus of control, from which place we can affect our lives in meaningful ways. But when I say that we're already always personally responsible, I mean that we're already always making choice. We're never not making choices in our lives. We might feel like we're not. We might feel like we have to, but we're always choicefully engaging with our lives, um, which is probably more of a Buddhist view again. And so, from
mhm.
that particular lens, we we can't not be personally responsible. We can only forget that we are. We can only pretend to not be. So the practice of personal responsibility, as I see it, is just returning home to it, to the fact that it's already there. It's like seeing it more clearly. So it's not
Right.
necessarily cultivating something that isn't there. It's just allowing ourselves to see how it's always been there. Is this
Mhm.
too abstract or?
If we can bring in some examples, so if
Mm-hmm.
because something that came to mind was, well, one example where one person might not be responsible is if someone has taken away their freedom of choice and they're making all the decisions for them. But then on the other side of that is that the person who has lost their freedom of choice is in some way responsible for their loss
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
a abstract way, because saying that could get you in a lot of trouble in like
Yes, it
tyrannical
could.
nations and things like that, where people's freedom of
Mm-hmm.
choice is completely taken away from them.
Mm-hmm.
But they
Mm-hmm.
could say have, like in Nazi Germany, there was freedom fighters, and they had the choice to say, no, I'm not joining the regime. I'll stand up to them, and if it means I die, then so be it. And that's an extreme example,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
that's where it goes to. That's where, if
Yes.
we take this train of thought, that's where it goes to. If you can't make your own decisions, and at what point can you actually not make your own decision? If someone says you either do what I say or you die, then that's your final decision, and you are responsible for that decision.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you are playing pass the buck, or you're constantly in this victim mentality where you're blaming, you're passing, oh, it's their fault. My parents did this to me, so I haven't turned out great, or my teacher wasn't a very good teacher, or that guy ran into me at the sidewalk, and now I'm disabled, and there's nothing I can do about these things, and passing the responsibility onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
What you're saying is that the responsibility that we have for ourselves is always there.
Yeah.
We are responsible
For passing the responsibility on.
for passing the responsibility. Yes.
Uh-huh. We choose to, which
Sure.
we can't
And,
actually, but we're pretending to.
okay, sure. I mean, it can be a very hard concept, because that example, I got hit on the sidewalk by a
Yes.
drunk driver,
Yes.
and it's obviously it's his fault for driving into me. Now I'm disabled. How is that my responsibility?
The I think that I would say the situation itself isn't my responsibility. Um, it was pure circumstantial, right? And yes, the drunk driver, um, it's their fault, like that I was hit. But
And
so there are true victims. There are people who have been truly victimized 100%. What they do after the point of victimization is where they would have responsibility. And I think, and so that person who's been hit by a drunk driver, are they responsible for the event having occurred? No. I don't think that I could make an argument for that would be true or helpful to anybody. Um, but I've worked with people in extraordinarily difficult situations, with incredible physical ailments, for example. They have all the reason in the world to blame, all the reason in the world. I mean, they can create the most compelling scenario I could ever come up with, and for whatever reason, they've decided not to. And that's they in deciding not to, they've retained their own personal power, and they feel empowered. And it it blows me away that yeah, they could make the best case on earth, but for whatever reason they're just not willing to give that away. They're not willing to. The event happened, it was incredibly unfortunate, but they're not willing to give that person power after the event by continuing to focus on it, uh feel like cast blame towards it, because it just, they know that it doesn't serve them fundamentally. It's not the best means available to them to move forward. um
this
that
feels like a very Buddhist philosophy or worldview.
might be probably, it probably is, man. A lot of my stuff, in ways I'm not even consciously aware of, has been informed from Buddhism, by Buddhism. Yeah.
I was
it you
researching.
know
Go on.
sorry, you know
No, go ahead.
Viktor Frankl, yeah, Man's
Yes.
Search for Meaning.
Hmm.
And I mean, that's also the most extreme example, or a set of the most extreme examples we can think of.
Mm.
Right, being in those camps, and I believe that he says somewhere in it something like, I still retain the right to choose how I respond or to choose how I feel, even when every other choice has been taken from me. Like, I still have a fundamental right that is inalienable, the right to choose my own set of reactions and responses in utterly horrible circumstances when I can't do anything else on a physical level. So even then, it's still happening internally, but
Yes.
even if there isn't any space for it to happen externally.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn as well,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Gulag Archipelago, which is about
yeah.
the Soviet labor camps, which were sounded in many ways just as bad as. It's hard to. I don't want to compare these things, but they're
I
all
know, I know.
terrible atrocities.
Yeah,
What happened in Russia, what happened in Nazi Germany, terrible atrocities. But he said he said that the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man and woman, every person. So we all have a responsibility. He also said, to take this to another level, he said that we not only are we responsible for ourselves, but we are
mm,
responsible for every other person,
mm, mm.
which sounds like a really hard burden to carry.
Yeah,
How
dude.
can I take responsibility for
Yes.
every other person? I
Especially
think
when we have very limited influence over other people.
for sure. I think it's not this kind of all or nothing mentality though,
Mm.
where, oh, if I'm taking responsibility for every other person, that means that I am actually responsible for every single action. That it's I have to carry the weight, and it's on me to change all of that, rather than it being a way of being and thinking, oh, I am responsible because it is my responsibility to do my best to put myself out in there in the world that's going to alleviate the suffering in the best way possible. It doesn't mean I'm going to
Awesome.
succeed entirely, and that is okay. But I am still responsible for everyone else. Because at what point does it end? If the majority of the population say, I'm only responsible for myself, but it's kind of groupthink, and then you have 9,999,999 people saying, I'm only responsible for myself, but really but that other one person is being influenced by all those people. They are responsible for one another. So just because you say I'm responsible for everyone else, it doesn't mean I'm responsible for literally everyone, because my influence only goes so far, but I'm still
Mm,
responsible in as far as my influence goes.
mm, mm. I really
Maybe.
like how you phrase that. I like how you phrase it. I have two thoughts coming to mind. I think that one of them, there's different levels of maybe of analysis, but I think that just on a personal level, and I know the people interested in the podcast are interested in personal growth. And so I think that maybe it might be helpful to frame these conversations you and I are having as the listener listens, like
Mm.
as potential experiments to run, and then they can see if it improves the quality of their life. So if the notion of personal responsibility, when practiced consistently, helps somebody feel more empowered, use it. And if not, I'm not going to say you have to. And if the notion of being responsible for everybody else helps that individual be more of who they want to be and helps them come more fully into themselves, then use it. But if it doesn't, if it just feels like a burden that's impossible, then I would say don't feel like you have to force it maybe. Um but I really like how you said what you said. I was impacted by it. And the going back to Buddhism. Sorry, listeners, but
I love
there's the
Buddhism. I love Buddhism. Yeah. We could
awesome.
talk about that
So
all day, I think.
the there's three different yanas, vehicles or paths: the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. And the Mahayana, when you enter into that, the second path, you take your Bodhisattva vow. And part
Okay.
of the Bodhisattva vow is, I will work for the liberation of all beings in all across time. So
Oh,
so the
right.
Bodhisattva is doing exactly, I think, what you're saying, and what Solzhenitsyn, if I got his name right, may have been alluding to, albeit from a Western perspective. And they're different, but they're getting to something similar, where the Bodhisattva assumes personal responsibility for the suffering of any being on earth at any time. And they make this unfathomable commitment to work for the liberation as in freedom from suffering, um,
Hmm.
of all beings. And so that really pulls them out of themselves. They exist for the other in a way that I personally haven't like touched into. Like it's such a non-egoic way of living.
So
Um,
that's the journey that Gautama Buddha went on,
yeah,
right? So he was on that path. He reached bliss, nirvana, but then he
yeah,
went back to help others to
right,
liberate them from suffering. What?
right.
So I was researching this the other day actually because bringing it into a new kind of framework of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that
Hmm.
I've been bouncing around, and that I found very interesting. That it seems like the highest goal is liberation, reaching nirvana. But if that was the case, then Gautama Buddha, when he reached nirvana, would have stayed there if that was the highest goal. So it seems like there's a higher goal than liberating yourself personally. But now this brings us into those two. So you said there was three paths because I don't really know in depth
Hmm.
a lot about Buddhism, but I'd love to learn more actually. So there's three
Hmm.
paths. One of them leads to enlightening yourself and then helping others. What are the other two? What do they
So
consist of?
I'm not a scholar, so if there is a scholar, they might correct me. But my basic sense is that the Hinayana, which is the first vehicle, is
Hmm.
about personal salvation, personal enlightenment, personal liberation.
Okay.
Um, the emphasis is really on personal responsibility. Uh, it frames a lot of my work in therapy, because about personal responsibility, owning our own reactivity, overcoming our neuroses, our historical conditioning, our familiar but constricting sense of self, seen through our egoic processing, and yes, reaching a state of enlightenment.
Hmm.
And then Hinayana is, a lot could be said. Maybe I'll just say two things. One of them is about coming back down the mountain of enlightenment and offering what we've seen to all beings, and working for the liberation of all other beings. So coming back into connection, into relationship,
Okay.
coming out of isolation. So then that becomes the overarching goal, to work all time until everybody has climbed the mountain and reached the summit, so to speak.
What's the distinction between that one and the Maha? My, sorry, I probably yeah,
That's the
Mahan.
Mahayana, and the first
Okay.
one is the Hinayana. Um,
Okay.
the
Is
distinction
there,
in terms of
is there two or three then? Two
the
paths.
third would be the Vajrayana.
What's that?
So the Vajrayana, I have a little bit less direct familiarity with the like scholastic side of it. I think I have more of a um experience with just the practical side of it, because my therapist is Vajrayana practitioner. The school I went to, Naropa, was started by Chogyam Trungpa, a Buddhist monk who was very Vajrayana style in his teachings. The
Okay.
Vajrayana is like, the idea is that all of life is workable. Every aspect of life can be used to reach enlightenment. Enlightenment is actually already within us. It's our basic nature. Buddha nature is the core of our being, and
Hmm.
we can work with the world to remove the veils that we've put there and to realize what's already true, which is our Buddha nature that's always there, always already there, never
Mhm.
actually tarnished or impacted. So Hinayana, I think it's Mahayana, sorry. They say like enlightenment takes lifetime after lifetime, hundreds of lifetimes to ever reach. Vajrayana
Okay.
says you can do it in one lifetime because everything, every single situation in your life can be used to touch into it, can be used to get closer to it. So Vajrayana is about being completely open to everything, discarding nothing, remaining in a state of wholehearted presence to anything and everything that happens in your life.
Mhm. Wow, that's really interesting. I find it interesting anyway. Sorry,
Me too.
listeners, if you got bored. But I find it interesting that they have Buddhism is they have lots of it's very detailed, lots of lists, lots of different
Yeah,
paths. Hinduism's
yeah.
quite like that as well with all the yogic traditions and things. Um, I find it interesting that they have these three separate paths because in my mind, which likes to simplify things, and I have a very conceptualizing mind, very right brained, I can just see them all being the same.
Yeah, they are.
Like you could just integrate those into one. Like you can just use
Yeah.
every little experience to help you enlighten. And once you get
Hmm.
there, you can then come back and help others as well. And then,
Yeah.
but also impact people in their everyday lives at the same time. Uh,
Well said.
yeah, it's really interesting. Um, you like to focus a lot about how we are relational beings. So
Hmm.
we're deeply relational, we're deeply social beings. So how do you think we're dealing, how do you think we're doing with that in modern days?
The relational aspect of our experiencing, more often than not, from what I can tell, could use some tinkering. It could use some fine tuning. It, we could be working on it a little bit more. Um, yeah, I think that. Yeah, so I'm a couples therapist. I mean, individual too, but also couples
Hmm.
therapist, and um, I sort of see relationality, yeah, as one of the cores of our human life, like one of the most important things that we have in our lives, to be in relationship with other people. I think that we all have a birth right. Is that the word? We all have a right
Yes.
to intimacy. We all have a right to intimacy,
Hmm.
and but we don't have in our culture a very good path to intimacy. We don't have a very we're not very skilled when it comes to actual relationship and especially to deeper levels of intimacy, from what I can tell.
Okay. And what about kind of friendships and those sorts of things with social media and things? Do you think, what's your view on those things, if you have one?
I don't know that I have a whole heck of a lot of a view on that. I mean, I know that some of the time, yeah, we lose like that quality of in-person friendship when we're sort of glued to the phone. And it's a very common meme now, like being with a group of friends in real life, but everybody's on their phone. And it's like,
Mm.
are are people becoming a little bit more like shy, like a little bit more guarded, a little bit less comfortable just in the immediacy of the intimacy with another person? I think that I could be mistaken, but I think that many studies show that like physical relationships are declining, like the number of sexual experiences people are having is declining.
Hmm.
Um, I think I saw on your podcast a clip of somebody saying that the number of friendships that we have, real life friendships that we have, like is in decline. Did I get that right? It was,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
yeah,
I think so.
yeah.
Yeah. I think in 1990s, half of people had at least three close friends, and now
Okay.
recently it's one in three people have uh,
Okay,
less
I
than
see.
3 close friends. So it's declining. I was listening to a podcast, Diary of the CEO, last night. It had a
Mm,
few different people on, and they were debating about pornography
mm,
and the pros and cons of it. And I think most of us in the online world see very much of the cons of pornography, but there was some good arguments actually on both sides, but
mm.
definitely not for the mainstream big big agriculture, big farm. It's like big porn
Yeah.
is never good. What they're doing to
Mm,
people because they're hijacking people's like limbic systems, right? And they just want. It's the same with social media in a sense, but it's so much more stimulating.
yeah.
And they brought up some really shocking figures about people like sexlessness, people not like relating to one another, people not really feeling like they want a partner and things like that. So those things definitely playing a factor. I think technology is really affecting us in lots of ways. But I want to get back to kind of your more area of expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you said intimacy is a birthright,
Yeah.
but we're afraid of it at times.
Yeah. Yes. Probably for many reasons, but the ones that come to mind right now are where our first experience of intimacy is. This is the therapist side of me, but it's in our early it's in our family of origin. It's our early childhood experiences. We're exposed. That's our first intimate relationship with our parents or our primary caregivers, and
Mm-hmm.
also the field of intimacy that we're exposed to in the intimate relationship of our parents between the two of them that we see. And most of us have had, um, small t traumas, like at least of
Mm-hmm.
course many people have big T traumas, but small t relational traumas where within the field of relationship our needs haven't been met. We've experienced varying degrees of hurt or abandonment or smothering as children, or we've seen very difficult patternings between our parents. I mean, in addition to the love, hopefully, but we've also seen all the pain. And so I think we have an, as far as I can tell, a sort of innate drive to closeness, companionship, and intimacy. But we're also, I think, very understandably skeptical, if not consciously, then unconsciously, of all the things that intimacy is going to entail. Um, and if the first model that we had, if there was a lot of pain in it, then we're going to be like very rightly sort of guarded about getting too deep, too close to another person, too intimate with them, because we intuitively know that eventually that pain is going to surface. Eventually that pain is going to arise. So we both deeply long for intimacy, but at the same time don't want it. And we would like it with just the good and not the pain, of course. And so we kind of
Wow.
try to like have our cake and eat it too. Like take one foot in but keep one foot out some of the time. That's one dynamic that people do in
Mm-hmm.
order to get what they deeply long for, but to not be hurt, not to be hurt again.
Sure. Yeah. So you think it's the fear of loss within the relationship. So you don't want to become intimate with someone because then you fear that if something works out badly, then you're going to feel loss rather than the fear of the intimacy itself.
Well, what do you mean by the intimacy itself?
Like some people don't like hugging. Some
Okay.
people are just like they find that intimacy
Ah,
uncomfortable.
the physical connection, the contact, the actual contact, they find disturbing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what I mean.
Okay.
Or like
Okay.
or just getting too close to someone. Like they keep people at a distance all the time because they don't want to let them in too much for some reason. Because for for some reason,
Totally. In that, so in therapy, we would be like, well, what's that reason? right? And
Mm-hmm.
and it would take some time to unpack, peel back the layers and get to some of the more root stuff of what the reason is. Um, but yes, I think that people are, and myself included, 100% guarded about intimacy because we know that eventually, and this will go back to the beginning of the conversation, that eventually it's going to activate the painful vulnerabilities we've spent our lives trying to not get activated. So for
Uh,
some people, that could be abandonment stuff. If they come from a childhood where they experience varying degrees of abandonment, and without appropriate repair, then that's going to be a very sensitive spot in them. And they're going to want to avoid the activation of that. So they might want to not get too close to somebody, because if that person were to leave, and they believe that person will leave if that's their experience, then
mhm.
that wounding is going to get activated. But somebody else with a different experience in childhood might not be afraid of abandonment. It might be like they might be afraid of loss of self. Maybe their parents were overbearing and smothering and didn't allow them a right to selfhood. So now they fear that if they get too close to another person, that person's going to eat them up, like psychologically, emotionally, or something. So they would
Okay.
have a different set of probably unconscious fears that would be driving their, you know, they have the impulse towards, but then would be kind of keeping them back from full intimacy because they're just trying to take care of themselves. Who wants to have those fears act or those painful vulnerabilities activated again? None of
Okay,
us.
so it's not just the fear of loss. Some
No.
people don't want to get into a new relationship or a relationship because they fear that it will end badly and then they'll have to go through this like horrible breakup situation. And it's the fear of loss or abandonment or rejection. But it can be any number of these things, right? That
Yeah.
that are coming up because of things in childhood or because of things in adulthood.
Yes.
Do you think? I think this that dynamic between childhood trauma and adulthood trauma is very is interesting because some people can kind of go through most of their life and that their childhood or adolescence and have a fine childhood, and then something really tragic happens to them, and their kind of whole identity splits apart because everything they thought about the world that was real and who they trusted, these other people and
Mm.
whatnot, just gets blown apart. How do you think? I'm not sure if you have a view on this, but something that I've considered because I just find it really interesting. How do you think it affects
Mm.
people differently? The fact that if someone was traumatized in adulthood compared to them being traumatized in childhood or adolescence.
I can't say I've thought about it much, but I'll tell you what I make up about it and
Yeah.
see how that lands.
Sure.
Um, yeah. So what I make up about it is that when it's childhood trauma, probably we construct a variety of like survival level strategies on top of the trauma to kind of keep the fear, the overwhelming pain, the difficult feelings at a bay. And then those strategies in time they sort of become more concrete. They become characterological traits. So the survival
Mhm.
strategies we use to regulate emotional intensity become just who we think we are, and it's just how we are. um, if somebody was hurt in childhood in the field of relationship in a very traumatic way, maybe they develop the strategy of keeping people at a distance. 20 years go by, 30 years go by, and they're a loner. And they're just like, that's who I am. I'm just a loner. I'm fine by myself. I don't need anybody else. That's it. That's me. Really, that's a very intelligent survival strategy developed 30 years ago,
Mm.
repeated so many times that it just feels like it's who you are. It's probably not who you are, but it's who you had to become to protect against the thing that happened to you, the pain. And then in adulthood, if we have the trauma in adulthood, I think it's probably less likely that the strategies we use to recover and to deal with the pain become characterological to the point that we think it's who we are and we forget about who we are before that. Of course, some of the time
Okay.
that happens, but probably just
Mhm.
with a little bit less intensity than it does when you have even more like 20 more years of momentum from childhood onward.
Sure. Yeah. there's a lot there's a lot going around online that says you cannot give love unless you love yourself. You can How can you give something you do not have? How are you going to give another person a drink, say, if your cup is not already full? What are your views on those kinds of ideas?
Mm, I don't know that I have a very good answer for you. When it comes to the literal cup metaphor, I mean, of course, okay, yeah, I can't give you a full cup if my cup is empty
Mm,
because is right because I would have no water to give, so I can't actually give you a full cup. Okay,
sure.
am I
How do you
getting it?
think this? How do you
Yeah.
think this relates to like relationships and intimacy?
Um, let's see what comes to mind. Mm, I mean, I suppose that I, on a certain level, I do agree with the statement. I can't really love you if I don't love myself. Probably my efforts to love you are more of a me trying to get you to love me because I don't love me. I need you to love me so that I feel myself to be lovable. And
Okay.
therefore, what I'm giving to you that I think is love, and I probably do think it's love, there's something else that it is. It's more colored by something else. This like need. Take this so that you give me what I need. So it's probably not real, mature, genuine love that would theoretically come from I love myself. I'm complete as I am. Um, I don't need you to complete me or to affirm my well-being, my worth as a person. And from that place, you come into my life, and I'm like, oh, this is a cool person. Love gradually develops. Yeah, there's a very different feeling quality there.
Mm,
So I
sure.
suppose I would agree. Yeah.
What about intimacy though? Do you To be intimate with other people, is that something you need to be able to be with yourself too?
I think that probably we should take a moment to define what we mean by intimacy, just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing and
Sure.
that
What
your
do you mean
listeners are
by
on the same page. Okay.
it?
So when I say intimacy, I think that I mean depth of relationship with another person. And I think that intimacy, I think that g- generically speaking, intimacy gets conflated with closeness. So when people are in a relationship and we think of the quality of intimacy, we assume that they're very close to each other, which is partly true. But I think that intimacy within relationship is a dance of closeness and separateness within the field of the relationship. So intimacy is being close to somebody and also being our own autonomous self, being individuals within the container of the relationship.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
yes,
Kind of.
I
Okay.
think.
Okay.
Hmm. Yeah. So, is it something that you have to practice
Yeah.
in yourself? Do you think to then give into the relationship, or is it some people that
Yeah.
aren't very accepting of themselves or don't care for themselves properly? Does that play a part in the relationship, how they come across? But people can be very much like, oh,
Totally.
I give all my love to them. And maybe there's some sort of perception that they're not worthy of their own self-care. They're not worthy of their own acceptance and love and intimacy. Um, Intimacy is an interesting thing to think about in relation to yourself. So maybe we could cover that as well.
Yeah.
What do you think about that idea of being intimate with yourself? But how does it play into the relationship dynamic as well?
Yeah. 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 One of my teacher mentors, he said something a long time ago that resonated with me. which is you can only be as intimate with another person as you are with yourself. So intimacy
Um,
starts with the self, and it's the ground of the depth of intimacy we experience with somebody else. What does intimacy with self mean? I think that the way I see it is that it's a lot of what we were talking about today and in the beginning of the conversation. It's a willingness to be in touch with, close to our own experiencing, to be with ourselves even when it's hard to be with ourselves, to stay with our vulnerabilities when they get surfaced, to be kind to the aspects of ourselves that are kind of difficult, that maybe we don't entirely like. Because when we're with another person for long enough, inevitably they're going to say or do things, intentionally or not, that will trigger our pre-existing vulnerabilities. And if I'm unwilling to be in relationship with, say, my abandonment, my fears of abandonment, my feelings of abandonment, then when you do something that triggers them, I'm going to have to get away from you, put up a wall with you, attack you, like do something that isn't intimacy. But if
mm,
I'm ready and willing to be intimate with that lifelong vulnerability of mine, then I don't need to get away from you when you do something that might trigger it. So therefore, I can actually stay intimate, stay open to, stay, in this case, connected with you because I'm willing to be connected with myself.
okay, sure. So that brings back then that fear of intimacy because you don't want to be
Yeah.
triggered in some way.
Yes.
But whereas if
Yes.
you're already comfortable with your own internal states, those uncomfortabilities, those emotions that arise, those and you're clear on those things potentially about
Yeah.
what are those, what is the internal narrative, what is that part of you in your shadow that is arising again and again in your adulthood from your childhood, and being in touch with that and accepting of it.
Yeah.
So you're no longer fearing it, but you've
Yes.
confronted it.
Yes.
You might be dealing with it, but you are at least not running from it anymore. It's not something that you need to run away from. It's something that you realize you can confront and deal with. And then when those things arise in the other person and they might trigger you in some way, you're then comfortable in
Hmm.
exploring that and being curious about it without just running away.
Totally.
That's a
If I have to
really
run away from it here, I have to run away from you there who triggered it. Yeah.
sure, yeah. And I think that plays a lot into general relationships, say in family. I like this definition of intimacy, of just being able to spend time with the other person in every sense, because a lot of people just think of intimacy as like sexual intimacy
Yeah.
rather than being rather than being the just the depth of a relationship and how you
Yeah.
genuinely can spend time with and accept the whole entirety of someone, not just the things you like.
Amen.
And I've thought about this quite a lot because I've been in quite a lot of support groups and things like that, where it's okay to talk about the things you're going through, those uncomfortable things that are arising. But when you go to family members, say, or a partner, because they care about you so much, it puts a lot of strain on them. I've had that with other family members come to me and they tell me a lot of this stuff. And then it it drains me and it makes me feel triggered or worried or something like that. Whereas if someone like you, where we know each other, but you're not my brother, you're not my dad. No, I don't have this inherent love for you because you're my family. Although we're all family, so we all love each other, right?
Yeah, that's
but
right, man. That's right.
but if you told me that you were dealing with something, it wouldn't affect me emotionally, really, because I could just be there and I could be objective enough. But I found that that's not always the case with people that you're closer with. Do you, what would you say to someone that's having that experience, say, if they're going to people and people say talk to people, don't they? Say talk about your emotions, like, oh, you need to open up to people, but then you go to a family member and you think they're nice. That's the one I want to talk to. That's my auntie. She's really nice. She's really accepting. But you go there and then it's kind of it puts up this strange dynamic because it makes her feel uncomfortable because it's bringing up stuff for her and because she isn't integrated in herself. How do people deal with that? How do we get around that?
So you're asking about the dynamic where I'm in the position of going to a family member for some sort of emotional support, and then they're unable to offer it the way somebody in a support group might, right? Because
Yeah, I
of what
think,
it triggers in
or
them.
either
Hmm.
way, where someone comes to you and you
Yeah.
feel like you're not in the position to.
Well, I guess maybe two different answers for the two scenarios
Mhm.
come to mind. If I'm going to you and I'm hoping, I think that like being very clear with you up front about what it is that I would like from you and setting the parameters for the discussion and kind of
Mm,
getting your agreement or not, you might say no, but getting your permission that like this is an okay thing to do. Like, hey, I have some stuff that's been coming up. I'm just having some feelings coming up around it. I'd love to be able to share it with you if you're available. And all I'd really like from you is to listen, or I'd like your advice, or I'd like you to tell me what it makes you feel. But like I think that when we can get an agreement with somebody and the person on the receiving end knows what they're signing up for and knows what's
mm,
happening, I think
mhm,
within that container a lot more can be accomplished. I think oftentimes people will just kind of go and just start on the other person, and the other person, their defenses come up and they're like, wait, what is this, what's going on, and they kind of might shut down visibly.
mhm,
So the couples therapist Terry Real, he's great. He always says, like, even in your relationship, like, always get agreement. Always know what it is that you're doing with the other person when it comes to some sort of processing type thing, and get them to say yes or to say no. But that way, if they say yes, the chances of success are far greater. So that comes to mind. And then the
mhm,
other side, if somebody's coming to me, like, again, maybe I would say, whoa, like, how do you want me to show up here? Like, what are you looking for? Like, how can I be of support to you? Kind of, again, just trying to get the clarity around the container probably
mhm.
could help. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
and then the personal responsibility piece would be like, if you share some things with me that activate me, it would be me owning them as my own activation, my own triggers. Like, this
Mhm,
isn't my stuff, isn't your stuff. You may have tripped one of my wires, but it's my wire. And so how do I take care of myself adequately while still being open to what it is I'm speaking about with you, but without putting my stuff on you or making myself pretending that I'm responsible for your stuff. I can tell you something now, and you, as you were saying, you won't feel too activated by it because you know that it's not your stuff and you can
mhm,
be objective about it. But when your brother or dad or something, and same for me and my family unit, come to me, I my boundaries aren't as clear. Like, I get more enmeshed. I'm like, oh shit, I have to do something about this. Actually, no, it's still their stuff. It's still my stuff. We've just lost sight of the boundary line. We've kind of let them fuse together in a way that some people call love, and it can be, but sometimes is not entirely accurate or helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So it's having those boundaries, and I think it's something came to mind when you were talking then as well about the fear of, oh, now this is going to play out in some way and cause more uncomfortability, more bad things to happen. Like if they're going through that, then I've got enough to worry about myself, and now I have to help them, and there's all these things that kind of tie into it. And like you say, you're getting enmeshed, and you're making other people's stuff your stuff, but you don't tend to do that in support groups. Yeah, very
Yes.
very great explanation, mate. Mate, yeah, thanks for clearing that up. I think this ties into like if we're doing this in a relationship, like an intimate relationship with a partner, it ties
Hmm.
really well, and we can finish on this point.
Cool.
ties in really well with this idea that that in itself is a great way of exploring personal growth together, because other people are going to trigger you in ways that you generally aren't just going to get triggered for no reason. Other people are going to bring up emotions in you that aren't ever going to just arise by themselves, because those emotions were placed there. They were kind of embedded into your psyche, into your unconscious mind by other people a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I heard something from a therapist friend of mine, actually, who said that it's not the traumatic event in childhood that traumatizes you. It's whether you get the right support from the people around you post-event. So if there's people there that give you the support and the allow you to process what happened at that time, then it doesn't turn into like PTSD.
I agree.
But if you don't have that, then that's when it turns into PTSD. So it's the people around you that have implanted those emotions and states that are arising. And it's often people, especially intimate relationships partners, that can trigger those things to come up. So relationships and the hardships that we go through in relationships can be great sources of personal development and personal growth. And you, going back to the Buddhist idea about everything in our daily lives being part of the path towards enlightenment, it's also about spiritual development. So how do those things all tie in?
You did a great job, I think, at tying them all in. I think that relationship is one of the best paths that we have to personal growth and spiritual growth. What is spiritual growth? I mean, many things to many people, but I think that one way of understanding it is, and it ties in with personal growth, is like increasingly overcoming our historical sense of self and patternings and feeling liberated, psychologically speaking and emotionally speaking. I think, sort of dropping our egoic experiencing. And when we're put up in the context of intimate relationship, time and again, we're just thrown into our deepest core vulnerabilities that otherwise we wouldn't have been activated, and that we try to construct our lives to avoid. We have a really beautiful opportunity to look at them, to know ourselves on a deeper level, to challenge some of our neuroses, our defenses, our egoic processing, and to sort of grow out of who we thought we were and become more fully ourselves, become more fully realized, to have our world expand in a really meaningful way. And yes, I think that all of these strands definitely tie together, and the context of intimate relationship is one of the most fruitful parts of our life if we're interested, A, in love, but B, in personal growth, development, and spiritual growth as well.
I put a post on LinkedIn a while back now, and it was 4 life hacks for personal growth you won't see anywhere else on LinkedIn. And the number one thing was get married.
Awesome.
And everyone was like, whoa,
man.
Wasn't expecting that. I was like, yeah.
Well said, bro. Well done.
Because it is one of those things. And Jordan Peterson really helped shape my view on this more and more a few years ago, when he was talking about how when you are kind of a serial monogamist, when you're in one relationship and you get uncomfortable and you think, oh, I don't like this, and then you jump onto the next. And maybe that's the reason you're getting uncomfortable, right? Is because there's something that's arising in the other person that you might not like because it's reflecting back to you something you're uncomfortable with, or it's something that you're feeling within yourself that you don't want to experience, you don't want to dig into, you want to avoid and distract from. So you're just going to then jump to the next thing. But the thing you're doing there is you're missing the opportunity to heal, to integrate, and to grow, and to or ascend spiritually, if you can see it in that way, right? And through marriage, traditionally marriage, you in front of God and in front of the law, you swear your life to another person. You say, for good or bad, for rich or poor, sickness and health, we're fucking sticking together.
Mm.
And through
Hell
actually
yeah.
making that commitment,
Mhm.
it forces you to confront all of those insecurities, all of those things that you might be unwilling to actually look at. And by doing that, you can then grow as a couple and ascend and become more spiritually enlightened together. And I think a lot of people might be scared of this because they think, oh, if I change or if they change and things we develop, am I still going to like them? Am I still going to love them if they come into a different person? So what would you say to that? We can finish on this.
Okay. Well, when it comes to like the future like that, I always come from the place of who knows? Who knows? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you won't. I'm not going to promise that you will still like each other. So, but is that if you want to make that your reason not to walk the path, not to grow, by all means, I would say to that person, like, it's your life. You can do that. But you kind of know what you got. You kind of know, the full extent of how things are going to be. You're kind of settling for the status quo.
Is that not then like just accepting a kind of a trauma enmeshed codependency?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I would say it is. But I would say it's your right to resign yourself to that. Like if that's what you choose, fair. Go ahead. I'm not going to force you to not choose it, but you know that's what you're signing up for. And if you choose to sign up for something different, I can't promise you what it's going to look like. I can promise you it will look different than what you have, and hopefully it will feel far better. And if you end up not liking each other, well, then from a place of maturity, you might decide to go in different directions. But wouldn't you rather that? Wouldn't you rather know that you're not fundamentally meant to be together because you've like grown so much together than not grow and live out something that is just fueled by codependency?
Yeah, I would, for sure. Personally.
I know you would. I wasn't meaning you. Yes, I know
Sure.
you. Yes.
Absolutely. I think I do ask myself the question of why would I choose that route? And I think if I look into the future and I imagine myself looking back, I think what would my future self want? And it's probably not to just stay in that same situation, to honor myself in the best way possible, to honor the highest side of myself, to know that I have potential and that I am worthy to live out the best way, my life out the best way I can.
Amen. I'm with you there.
Great. Thank you, man. Well, it's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Man. Thank you.
And where can people find you online? Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, if they'd like to get in contact, they can just write me an email, trevor@theothertherapy.org. I do have a website, theothertherapy.org. And my YouTube channel, they can Google Trevor Brown, The Other Therapy, and they can find me on YouTube if they're interested in these types of explorations.
Great. Yeah, I would definitely recommend your YouTube channel. I think your videos are really great, concise explanations on fascinating topics. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for putting those videos out. And thanks again for coming on the show. And let's do it again.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate it.